Welcome to episode 7 of the Alcon Maddox War Plan webinar series. Today I'm excited to be joined by Amin Islam, who is a resident specialist in artificial intelligence and also the CEO of WDigital. Is that the right pronunciation of the company, by the way? I mean, WDigital?
WDigital, yeah, perfect.
Perfect. So excellent. We've already done sound check, so we can hear us. Great. The other thing I would ask, just permission more than anything. As you guys know, if you've attended the webinars before, I tend to speak fast sometimes. So if I do speak fast, and for whatever reason you can't hear me or pick up on what I'm saying, please do just say something in the chat box, and we're quite happy to rephrase or reconfirm that. Okay. So again, it's just going to be myself and Amin talking on the session today. If you do have questions or even insights throughout the session, then I'd recommend you please put those in the chat box, and we're obviously very keen to read these out as we go through. So if there's a question, just type it. If it's an insight, just type capital I followed by your insight, and like I said, we love to read those out as well, just to get an indication of that the topics that we're obviously covering are on point for you guys. So look, for those of you who don't already know me, my name is Richard Ritchie. I run a recruitment and executive search firm based here in the UAE. It's a very niche organization, and our primary focus is on sourcing senior sales and commercial leadership talent into the technology sector, the IT channel industry to be more precise. Typical roles that we work on are channel manager, partnerships manager, VP of sales, commercial director, and sales director. Now, I've actually spent the last 25 years building and leading high-performing sales teams, and I know just how important it is for companies to install the right commercial leader, either when they're looking to scale up or penetrate the market for the first time, let's say, or in situations like we're in today when we're looking to actually protect and safeguard underlying revenue. So if you do have any questions or concerns in that regard of what's going on in your business right now, then please do get in touch after this session. Now, that said, today's obviously not about me, nor is it about recruitment. It's actually about you, and I'm specifically now talking to business managers in the IT and services community. Now, over the last few weeks, I've spoken to many of you on the call today to get a better sense of really what are the top of mind challenges that you guys are facing as a result of COVID-19. And some of you have actually already taken part in or joined, if you like, our mastermind community, which has been set up to tackle this crisis head on. Now, these top of mind challenges that have been articulated to me are really what's driving the content of this webinar series. And this is really my way of giving back to the community, the IT community that is, but also to bring us together to ensure that we set ourselves up to thrive rather than simply survive during this period of uncertainty. Now, for those of you who've been on the session before, you'll already know we've covered sessions, or we've had topics already covered, like how to keep the remote workforce engaged, the increased threat to cybersecurity, fast-tracking digital transformation, safeguarding reputation for the COVID-19 world, managing a partner ecosystem, and business continuity, as were the one we covered last week. Each week, as you know, we bring in a different industry expert to help us piece together strategies to overcome these top-of-mind challenges. In the coming weeks, we'll be looking at turning crisis into an opportunity. This will actually be next week, where we'll have a focus on Singapore. The week after that, we'll be preparing for the bounce back, and after that, we'll be dealing with change management. At the end of the series, we'll be compiling these strategies in the form of a white paper. So if you'd like to receive a copy of this white paper, stay until the end of today's session, and I'll give you some information about how you can get hold of a copy of that. So today's session, we're going to be doing something slightly differently. Now, usually we have a top-of-mind problem or challenge, let's say, and then we come up with 3 strategies for dealing with that problem. Today, we're going to do things slightly differently. Instead, we're going to deal with 3 problems. Quite ambitious, I know. We're going to deal with 3 problems, but we're going to use one solution to cover those 3 problems, and that is artificial intelligence. So there's no better person, really, in my mind, to help guide us in this fact, and that is Amin Islam. So without further ado, Amin, I'm going to hand over to yourself to just, why don't you give us a little bit of background about who you are, where you're from, what it is your business does, and then we'll get into the 3 challenges as you see it that artificial intelligence is really addressing during this crisis. Over to you, buddy.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Well, first of all, thank you, Richard, for having me. It's a pleasure to be on. So my name's Amin, as Richard has done a brief introduction. So my company, WDigital, we focus very much on solving business challenges with artificial intelligence. We do try to be vendor agnostic, so we do look at best of breed scenarios. So client might have investments in different areas. So we look at how can we, first of all, maximize their current investment, and also, what is the market telling us in terms of what are the best of breed solutions out there, and then we'll advise a client on appropriate measures to move forward in terms of their business transformation. So just to touch on, I guess, why the organization was started. So my background, I was born and raised in the UK, in London. Spent a number of years in the UK with various software companies, including Microsoft. I was traveling, got some really rare insights into research facilities, got to see technologies that were still not coming out for another 15, 20 years, that were being used in the military. So that was really exciting. And to see the power at such an early stage, this was actually a research facility in Cambridge some years ago, really inspired me to focus more on, okay, how can we bring this to market, and how can we enable an ecosystem that's accessible to everyone. Sometimes there are technologies that are sometimes out of reach, whether it's because of geography, whether it's because of people, talent restrictions. So we really set up WDigital to help clients, irrespective of their sector, or irrespective of what technologies they've already made investment into, guiding them on maximizing that to create ultimately a business benefit using that technology. So that's a bit of background about myself.
Artificial intelligence. You said this technology you were exposed to that was 15 years ahead of the market had outside the military. Is it artificial intelligence, or was it in different arenas?
Yeah, so it was different arenas, but primarily at the time it was machine learning and artificial intelligence. So looking at technologies that can, I'll give you an example. Using AI to analyze MRI scans in a medical scenario. And now we're at a stage where there have been clinical trials that have shown that artificial intelligence can more accurately identify abnormalities than real doctors. And there are lots of studies that have been done around the world. So really exciting stuff, and we got to see it quite early on. Lots of use cases, digital courts. So now we're seeing artificial intelligence looking at small violations like parking tickets, and being able to analyze, the evidence and make judgments, etc. So that was really exciting, and I think those were the two components that stood out to me at the time.
Mm-hmm. No one likes parking tickets, let's be fair. So let's fast forward now to, I guess, current day, and I guess some of the technology that you're employing today is still going to be market leading anyway, because it's very much on the forefront of, I guess you call it edge technology, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's do this step by step. So there's three challenges we're going to be addressing today, and you're going to talk us through how how AI is addressing those problems. The first one you've mentioned, or you want to cover, is that of collaboration. So can you just give me a little bit of background about that, and why is that relevant to a COVID-19 world?
Yeah, so we've been trying to drive the digital transformation message quite aggressively, quite hard, because it's in our DNA and what we do. But I think COVID-19 definitely has significantly accelerated digital transformation, and there's been a lot more receptiveness when we're driving those messages. So one of the key areas is collaboration. I think a lot of companies have just jumped to using video calling solutions, and that's the idea of digital. But when we talk about digital transformation and workplace enablement remotely, we're talking about digital whiteboarding. So how do you engage with your team, able to share ideas live? How do you co-author a document, for example? That's another challenge, that now you can't be sitting in front of someone rather than emailing a document back and forward. How can you co-author a project that you're working on live, and you can see live edits going on while your team member is on a video call working on the same document? So how can you do that? And also being able to access that information on any device, anywhere you are. So we're very fortunate in most regions now to have very stable mobile connections. So for example, myself, if I'm on the road, I can sign documents, I can work on a document, I can take a video call, etc. So really going beyond just having a video call, but having digital whiteboarding sessions, team sessions, you have to collaborate on documents together, and really taking it steps beyond just traditional, video calling.
And is this still defined as AI though?
So there is AI built into some of the areas that we focus on. So with the mass group of workforces around the globe being at home now, one of the key challenges is understanding how are people performing at home. Something that we deploy that you can access as an individual, so it's not shared with your organization, so it's shared with yourself. I can look at my patterns of work. So am I reading, if I read an email at 1 a.m. at night, I can see that my work-life balance will change on a particular graph that will show that I'm reading emails in the middle of the night. What are my hours? How much rest time am I having? Also, really doing a deep dive into how quickly am I responding. So I can have analytics on, which is using artificial intelligence. How quickly am I responding to my colleagues versus how quickly am I responding to a client? I can actually track if I'm on a video call or a meeting, a video call, have I been distracted? So I can track whether I've opened an email and read an email while I've been on a video, which shows distraction. So when we start to take these insights and look at our habits, I was really surprised with my own habits. Some of them were really bad, getting a ping, someone sends me an instant message while I'm on a call, and I'll be tempted because a notification to go and reply to that message, but it takes away engagement. So I'm less engaged in my current activity. So using these analytics to improve your behaviors while you're in a remote environment that we're typically unfamiliar with, a lot of us are unfamiliar with, it's important to make sure we're still performing at a high level. And at home, one of the biggest challenges we hear from clients is the personal element of being at home, having kids around, having family members around, and being distracted. And it's really tough. And we're all going through those challenges. So how can you use the AI to pick up on your bad habits and give you advice on, right, how can I make small incremental changes to improve my performance at home?
But I guess it's two ways as well, right? So if you're a manager on a call with your team, you want to be able to keep your team engaged. So if you, for example, in the analytics summary I get from GoToWebinar after these calls, I can get I forget the actual phrase it uses, but let's say engagement score, for example, for everybody who's joined the call. And they can rate, obviously everyone's usually about 100% when I'm hosting a webinar, but they can go pretty low, and I don't know how that information is picked up, but I would imagine it'd be something to do with maybe tracking eyeballs. Are they focused on the screen? Are they, like say, looking down, away, checking phones? Are they doing other things on their machine? And I guess from a management perspective, if you're now responsible for leading a team remotely, using this kind of technology, then you need to know how engaging am I as a manager, as well as just how efficient are my employees, right? Because one of the complaints I've heard from quite a few senior executives is that they've actually expressed disappointment in their middle management, in their perhaps willingness and ability to really step up to the plate and really look after their teams remotely, because they haven't done it before. But that doesn't necessarily mean they can't or shouldn't do or shouldn't learn quickly. But I think these kind of tools that you're mentioning could be quite useful from a management perspective to really help us as managers look after our team, right?
Absolutely, and it's really important, especially in the changing landscape. For sure, there are going to be companies that are going to hold this working from home model post COVID-19, right? So companies can look at their balance sheet and say, right, we've made a massive investment into the technology because of the crisis. We've had to adapt. We've been forced to adapt. Now we've made that investment. Why should we pay for X amount of office space when we can have 30-40% of our staff working from home, and maybe certain staff working from a particular office location? So from a capex and opex perspective, companies are going to hold this model. And as that model, as you've just said, Richard, you have management that are looking into behaviors, it becomes absolutely critical. How do you understand how people are feeling at home? Are they motivated? Are they feeling creative? when they're remote, when they're not sitting next to you in the office, when you're not having, when 40% of your team members are now at home, you've come back to the office, some are permanent home. How do you make sure they're still engaged? We're really lucky. So we're partnered with a company called Searchy. So they've developed some incredible AI technology. They have a product called Culture Pulse, which we're a deployment partner for, that picks up on unbelievable elements of someone's personality using AI video. Confidentiality is really important. So it's not like if someone wants to give feedback about how they're feeling in the current environment, their names aren't going to be highlighted. It's shown on a graph where we can see overall how is the team's creativity, how is the team's motivation while they're at home, and that becomes so important with that remote workforce. Now, how do as a leader do I go ahead?
Questions? Sorry to interrupt. I mean, I'm just curious. Is this kind of assessment based on questions that are kind of pre-populated in the system, and you're responsible to give answers to? So and they're looking. The technology is looking for certain indicators.
Absolutely, yeah. So keywords, facial expressions, but there's speech recognition technology built in. So you can program in certain keywords. So you can ask a particular question that's relevant and important to your organization and your cultural priorities. And then the responses will be analyzed depending on what you've inputted as the key elements for your organization. And then it's a massive enabler to be able to then make decisions based on certain teams. So you might have a particular team, your marketing team might be low on the creativity marker. So how do you now, you hold a competition internally within the team to motivate them, who comes up with the best marketing engagement idea in a particular week. But how do you enable and you make them competitive and enjoy being at home? So and that's AI driven. So these tools are really powerful. They're being looked into a lot more by especially larger enterprises, but they're really powerful to make decisions and make the organization more engaged and lean.
And do you as a company then help organizations interpret these results and then make suggestive behavioral changes, or is it really up to the HR lead within an organization to do that themselves, or simply providing a platform by which to access more data?
Yeah. So I think it's important for we give the advice on the roadmap for the technology, how it should be used, and we have incredible partners like Searchy that provide the technology for us to deploy. But then it's important to hand the baton over to the organization. The graphs are very easy to read. They're spider diagrams with different traits. They're very easy to read, and I can share screenshots that you can share out afterwards, Richard, that you can share with the team just to see how easy it is. But it's important to know where our job ends and we hand over the baton to the client. They understand the culture the best. They know what the priorities are. So then the HR leaders can then say, okay, right, we can see X areas of low engagement. Let's have a roundtable with the management leadership team to see, okay, how can we improve this area? And it's important because people are nervous. We're getting a lot of feedback that individuals working from home are massive. There are surveys that are saying, coming out from credible sources, that are saying 64% of individuals are worried about their job because of COVID, cross industry. So how do you reassure your staff? So clearly, generally speaking, we've identified and we know that whether it's a lack of engagement, collaboration, people are nervous about their jobs and working from home. How do you identify why that is occurring, and how can you put practices in place to make people confident?
I guess there's two sides, right? If someone's nervous about their job, they're almost going to want to prove that they are productive. So they're almost, I guess there'd be a portion of the workforce that would be very open and welcoming of such insights, because it proves that I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. It proves I'm engaged. Whereas I'm sure there are others that are less willing to give you access as an employer to this kind of data. But is that I guess how it's very sensitive in how that then gets interpreted, because you can interpret the willingness to give the data or not as an indicator of are they engaged or not. I can see why it'd be very, very sensitive. There's actually a question in the comment box there. I mean, I'm not sure if you can read it. The question is, do you have such solutions within WDigital, so within your organization, or do you run services?
Yep. So we use the terminology dog food. So eat what you use. So we do use the tools internally. We use, for example, the analysis. I've been quite concerned by my own analysis. So it doesn't get shared with other team members. It is restricted. So it comes to when we're talking about how you're collaborating in terms of your day-to-day activities. I was talking about earlier about responding to messages, your engagement during meeting. That's personal to you, so no one else can see that. So your line manager can't. That's for you to act on. So that's something that we use internally, and there are some members of the team that I'm open to sharing my feedback with. Sometimes it's embarrassing, and some team members will share their feedback, but generally it's getting that insights and taking action on it. So I found some of my habits, as an example, again, is working late into the evening, which then might affect my engagement in the morning, and again being distracted by messages coming up on the screen. So now just to give an example of a change I've made, I've now enabled a do not disturb when I'm on a meeting. So now no notifications. My WhatsApp, web, the other tools that I have running in the background will not give me notifications when I'm in do not disturb mode. And these small things do make a difference, because when you're speaking to someone, they can tell whether you're engaged or not. And when your eyes move around and you're stuttering, it does affect your performance and how much you can retain and contribute to a particular meeting or session.
We've got another question from Sony. So the question is, so the knowledge that one is closely watched and observed, how do you think a close monitoring of the employees will affect their motivation and productivity? So I guess, do you think that's going to motivate people, or do you think that's going to be, Big Brother's watching, I'm not so sure I like working for this company anymore?
Great question. So all of the tools that we use in terms of analysis of individuals, so first of all, the tool that I mentioned that we use internally that will analyze your own behavior, your management can't see that. There's actually not a function within the tool for that to be shared. As an employee, you can choose to share your analytics if you like. You can take a screenshot or share that, but the organization can't see that data with the tools that we use. Secondly, on the trait dimension, so whether you're feeling motivated or creative, and the culture pulse tool by our partner Searchy, that's an anonymous activity. So the leadership will get a graph, and you can have a look at, okay, this is my sales team, they're not feeling very creative, and there's a scatter diagram that will show individuals as dots. So there's no name associated. You don't know what their role is, you don't know their name, you don't know what geography they're in. It just turns up as a dot. So that privacy part is absolutely critical, and it's a very good question. Thank you for the question. I think if we were to go into a scenario generally as technologists, where we're highlighting individuals and really going into, there's a thin line between privacy and performance. It's a very thin line, and we don't want to go over that line, and that's something that we just choose not to do, because then you get biased results. So if someone knows they're being monitored anyway, the results are not as useful, because people may not give organic, natural answers, because they might think, oh, actually this is going to my manager, what's my manager going to think? So we actually refrain from those type of activities.
You know what, it'd really be, obviously it's too late for that now, but what really would have been interesting perhaps if this kind of technology was installed within an organization before the crisis, and then to monitor people during the crisis, just to see has their engagement truly dropped, or I'm sure some people's engagement is actually increasing. They're actually more efficient working from home, maybe because they're actually working perhaps longer hours, because they're happy, they're choosing the hours they work, but then obviously doing it the other way around, now going back to work and using it to see were they better off working from home. Well, again, you can skew those results in your favor, going, oh look, I'm terribly inefficient in the office, better send me back home. So it is quite like you say, very, very sensitive topic, giving those insights, but from what you've just said, I mean, so this is available on an individual basis, so I can subscribe to say something like this to understand from a personal level how engaged am I, or do I need to do things differently for my own development, let's say. But at a company level, it's anonymous, so it gives you insights about your broader team members, but not specifically to that particular individual, right? So no one's at risk, should we say?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've got the enterprise solution, that's the Culture Pulse solution, which is focused on understanding the team dynamics, culture. And then we've got a separate tool by a different provider, an organization we're partnered with, that gives you your individual insights of, you know, your working habits, your actual working habits of, you know, response time, etc. We have found with the COVID situation, you know, response times sometimes have got less with, you know, lower with people working from home, but their productivity has increased because actually individuals are working longer hours now. There's a we get feedback when we look at these traits and we dig into why is this behavior occurring. People are struggling to determine their weekends now, and their weekends are merging with the rest of their week, and you know, and they might not feel like working in the morning, but they end up working in the evening. So actually, with some individuals, we've seen productivity spike with a lot of.
You know, it's interesting though, because you talk about productivity, and I guess by the sounds of it, productivity in this sense is being measured by the delivery of results. Whereas in my mind, yes, that's productive, but so I worked in sales and sales enablement my entire life, and the reality is, if you look at productivity in isolation, that's not a true reflection of how I would say effective or efficient someone is, because the reality is, yes, you can deliver more than anyone else in your team if you work double the hours, but does that make you the most effective person? I would argue no, because the reality and the way I view it is that if someone's taking twice as long to deliver the same results, they'd be at a higher risk of, say, leaving or getting fatigue at some point, because it's requiring more of them in order to deliver. And from a management perspective, I think it's key that we're able to understand, okay, how much time is it taking someone to deliver what we expected? And so like I said, how effective are they being? Because without an insight into the effectiveness, it's hard for us to pinpoint where the actual training need is. And training around being efficient and effective, I think, is absolutely critical. Certainly, from in my experience, from coming from a sales background, right?
Absolutely, and it comes back to the whole motion of working smart rather than how many hours you're working.
Yeah, 100%. So I think the first two, I think, have actually merged into one quite nicely, actually. So we spoke obviously the collaboration tools and about the working from home. You mentioned the culture pulse, I think, is what you referred to as. Is there anything else you want to say about those two topics then before we move on to the second? And also, guys, if there's any other questions or insights about what we've just discussed, please do drop them in the chat box so we can read those out for you as well. So is there anything else on this, Amin, or are you satisfied with that?
And any other questions, we can answer them as we go along if they come up later on.
Cool. Okay, so just got a message in the chat box, an insight, I think, more than anything, from Kay. Thank you, Kay. So Kay says, cool session. Thank you. Let's work on changing mindsets and change management. Nice message, and I guess COVID will begin to force organizations to make change. Thanks, guys. Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's just the more we kind of, I think the bottom line is we need to support our organizations, support the employees within it, and increase, I guess, the level of happiness of our employees. And there's nothing, in my own experience, there's nothing that makes someone happier than the feeling that they've actually been productive, right? It's that feeling of progress. There's nothing more demotivating than putting in an exponential amount of hours and not getting the desired results. So if we can provide a way of measuring and enabling that, I think that'll be a massive game changer for a lot of companies.
Absolutely, and thank you, Kate, for the comment. And I agree. I think the technology there is to assist in decision making, but absolutely, as Kay mentioned, it is important. Mindset, growth mindset, learning, being adaptable, and making sure that the leadership are supporting that shift as well. So the technology is there always, I say, to assist, is not there to give a particular decision, is there to assist. But mindset overall and motivation, leadership is incredibly important.
Yeah, it was interesting you said at one point you mentioned then about having a growth mindset. So in the past, whenever I've been involved in recruiting sales leaders or country managers, let's say, to look after a territory under, should we say, less guidance than normal, it's important that we're able to, during our conversations, to understand, okay, does this person have a growth mindset, and also how is this person motivated? Now, I do believe that we can't motivate anyone. It's for us to understand what motivates them and remind them of what motivates them constantly, so we can keep them engaged. But when you're looking or you're installing someone in a territory whereby you can't interact with them on a regular basis, understanding how they motivate themselves, understand how essentially what keeps them going. If they look externally, let's say, to motivation for, let's say, pats on the back or gold stars or whatever you call it, that's to me less appealing when we're installing someone to run a new territory, as someone who gets satisfaction from internally. You know, they know when they've done a good job because they feel good, because they can see the results themselves. So understanding the difference between those two is very, very important when we're making, certainly when we're making hires at a senior level, whereby we don't have the time to micromanage, if we say that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think just generally, I know probably maybe touching on a slightly different topic here, but in terms of the leadership side, absolutely, people have different motivators. In our team, there are some individuals that are motivated more by financial elements of their package, whereas other individuals are more motivated by having time off with their family. And as an example, I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is when we're going to large enterprise organizations. As the company gets bigger, you know, it's almost like a one-size-fits-all approach tries to be, you know, enforced in the organization. And what happens is things like performance or personal development plans become a tick box exercise rather than, you know, a proper psychological profile of the individual, which these technologies assist with, understanding their traits and behaviors, and then really deeping, you know, doing a deep dive into, okay, right now, how can I motivate or switch on, you know, specific elements of an individual's, you know, personality, so I can extract the most out of that individual. And I think it's a massive challenge that organizations face as they're scaling. How do you really provide that tailored leadership, mentorship, when you've got a lot of staff? But I think it's critical to make sure that we go back to the personal development side and understand those traits that these technologies help with, and then activate those elements and make sure we're using the right drivers for the right people, not trying that one-size-fits-all approach and just doing a tick box personal development plan. Yeah,
wonderful. I think that makes perfect sense. Excellent. Great. So look, let's move on to the next. Oh, hang on, we got another comment here. 1 second. So it means that companies have not been paying attention to the work from home opportunities. Most performance plans are revenue focused. Yeah, I don't. It's an interesting insight, actually. I think it really depends on what part of the organization you work in. If you work in a commercial part of the organization, then I would say yes, the performance plans would be certainly a large weighting towards a dollar value, let's say, because it's easy to determine, you know, measure what you do on a daily basis, how, you know, what's the dollar output of that. But when you work in a different part of the organization, let's say for tech or product, for example, it's very hard to attribute the dollar value to the hours that you put into that organization. So I think any other data you can capture by means of measuring the effectiveness of someone's performance is key. But I think this all boils back down to, again, coming from a leader within an organization, is understanding everybody within that organization needs to have bought into this shared vision, but they also need to understand, okay, what is my contribution, or how is my contribution affecting the growth of this organization? And if I think there's ever a disparity between what people are doing and where the company, they perceive the company to be heading, then that mismatch will that can't last for long. Either that person will be asked to leave, or that person will leave. There's no future in that relationship. It's very, very important that we as organizations align with all our employees. And it's not easy, no one's saying it easy, but make sure we're all on the same page. And I think the more tools we have available to enable that collaboration and that shared mindset, I think the better our companies will become. So let's move on to the third part, which is a super interesting part for me actually. This is now, so we talked about the collaboration, we talked about working from home, and the tools we can employ using AI to help get the most out of our staff, but on a people who work for us, but then also from ourselves, we'll make sure we're being the best we can be. But then the question becomes, okay, so what happens when we go back to work, or how can AI be used in order to get people back to work quicker? So can you just give us a bit more background perhaps on this point, please, Amin?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we're partnered with Mediscreen, we're actually a deployment partner. So the technology is absolutely incredible. It uses various speech recognition technologies to basically use AI, link that to symptoms and speech recognition and the inputs that you've given manually as well, to identify people that are high risk. Right now we have the frontline doctors are completely maxed out. How do we're going to have a mass flow of people going into work when there's still in a lot of cases a risk of a second wave of COVID. So how can we minimize that pressure? So hospitals around the world are struggling. We know that testing has fallen short in lots of different locations, and we're not we don't give a clinical diagnosis of whether someone has COVID or not, but the technology assists in prioritizing an individual. So effectively a virtual triage service where if someone says, okay, I've had a cough, I've been sneezing, I've lost sense of smell, which are all symptoms related to COVID, we can put a weighting on that and then prioritize an individual for review. The technology actually at the moment, we pass that information on to a doctor that's not frontline, that will then review that video and review the inputs that have come in, and say, okay, this person is high, medium, or low risk. They can go into work or not go into work. So if we look at, whether it's a hospitality hospitality sector organization that have, thousands of staff to get back into a hotel, or whether it's a technology company that needs to get their contractors back on site, irrespective, really, having, the scenario of having thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people going for screening is not realistic for an actual test in most locations, or going through a hospital is just not efficient. So that's that. Talking about problems and going back to the topic of a problem, that's the challenge that we identified. Now partners have built incredible technology to be able to screen and prioritize individuals, to give guidance on, okay, whether someone is healthy to go back to work or not. And I guess the power of the AI, you can screen thousands of people within an hour. You don't or even minutes.
Right, so as long as they've got their own access point, their own computer, I guess that's all they need, right?
Absolutely, and there's no scale limitation to how many screenings can take place. So and especially in this region, I know other countries, there are some sudden decisions that we're not expecting that are made. So a decision for tomorrow gets made today, and we find out, okay, a lockdown. I found out yesterday that times have been adjusted for our sanitization program in the UAE was removed, changed from 10 to 8 p.m. And I only found out yesterday, and the article only came out yesterday. So these, because of the impact on the economy, obviously some of the decisions are being made very quickly. And when we do have these mass restrictions lifted suddenly, is it realistic for us to get thousands of people with test kits at home or into a hospital all in one go? It's not realistic. So that's really there for the organization to be able to assess. So there have been a lot of questions that have come out around, is it legal to ask these type of questions? So talking about most of our clients in the GCC at the moment, we are allowed, an employer is allowed to ask about if you have a medical condition that may affect your work, or if you have any medical conditions. Under the guidelines of Dubai Health Authority, your employer is allowed to ask you for that information here in the region. So we can use the technology to prioritize people, get people back mobilized as quickly as possible. It's a lot more, I'd say, cost effective generally than going to see a doctor, or using other methods. It's a lot faster, it's a lot quicker. The whole process takes about 10 minutes to complete.
Well, I've got a few questions for you, just as you've been talking. So you mentioned, you used the word screening and you used the word triage, virtual triage at least. So what is the liability at play here? If your technology is saying this person's safe to return to work, and in fact, because like you say, it's a form of virtual screening, but it can't be as accurate as obviously swabs, let's say. So what is there any liability there at all?
Great question. So first of all, we have quite a large disclaimer before you start the process of what the technology can do and what it can't do.
Okay.
But from a validity perspective, first of all, we do have quotes and public quotes from doctors that have used the tool that have given their feedback, which has been extremely positive. From a validity perspective, we provide a recommendation. So ultimately, the type of clients that we typically focus this technology with, they usually have their own in-house doctor. If they don't have their own in-house doctor, they'll have access within their medical provider to certain doctors in a particular clinic. And anyway, the screening will go to a doctor that we have a partnership with an entity here that have doctors from the UK, that have doctors from the US, have doctors from the UAE, that will review the video in any case. So they will be able to give a professional clinical recommendation as someone who's approved to do so based on the video, what the person has said, whether they feel that person needs to go in for a test or a full review.
Got it. The other thing you mentioned, so is this, so you say this has been used by a few doctors. Is this been openly endorsed by a medical association of any form, or is it just doctors that have used it and recommend it?
So there are other entities that we're in discussions with, some of which we can't disclose because they're a bit confidential at the moment. They're government entities, etc., that are looking into trials of the solution. But right now, we do have public statements from clinics, as an example, from doctors in clinics that have actually used the tool that have given their feedback.
Wonderful. And then you mentioned that this, obviously you can scale this, and that let's say you're a hotel or hospitality company where you have thousands of employees. Potentially you can do them all in one evening because they've all got their own access points. But then you mentioned that this data then gets run by I guess a GP. So then surely that would be the bottleneck, right? Everyone can submit their video assessment, let's say, but then if there's only one GP within the organization, then there's going to be a bottleneck before that data can pass through. Is my understanding correct there, or not?
Yes, correct. But where the technology really assists, great question, Richard. I love the challenging question. So it wasn't going to be easy, right? But it does prioritize. So once the clinician gets comfortable using the tool, they can decide, based on the output, whether they're going to discount, let's say, 60% of the results, which may be, very low risk. And the videos are very short as well. The videos are 2-3 minutes, and it focuses on the core questions. It also removes things like people are late for appointments. Things get messed around. I remember, I haven't really been to the hospital here much, but definitely in the UK, you end up waiting sometimes a couple of hours if you get an appointment because of people turning up late, etc. So it removes that as well. So in terms of the efficiency of the clinician, it gives them a lot more time back. And also, we don't use frontline doctors. We're not using doctors that are in the hospitals. We're using doctors that are actually specialists in telemedicine. So they're used to the telemedicine practices. So those are the type of doctors that we're using. And again, they're prioritized. So we could, let's say we've got 1,000 assessments that are completed. We might find that, we don't need to review 70% of them because they're extremely low risk and they haven't mentioned hardly any of the keywords, or their temperature is normal. So we ask certain questions about temperature, etc. So they could be identified as very low risk. So it removes that massive burden of having to spend a lot of time doing every single one.
Without
that's where AI comes.
Yeah, because without that kind of triage, it's just video messages that are getting sent to a doctor. But that's
it doesn't really help. You're just using technology almost for the sake of using technology. All it helps with, we found, is if there's in clinical scenario where you're doing telemedicine. It helps you when you're trying to access people that have can't move or have challenges moving, or they're in a remote location. Otherwise, the time aspect, you're not really using technology to make the process more efficient, and that's what we try to focus on.
Awesome. So another question, guys, if you guys have any questions as well, please do jump in or give us an insight, because I've got taking all along here. I've got a few questions. So given, so this is just trying to formulate the question myself. So it's super interesting way of using AI here. But do you not think, given that, let's say, some countries are in a position where perhaps they don't have enough testing to give to frontline staff or people who are potentially at risk, is this not something you could offer those institutions as well as a kind of let's say an initial triage, so they go through this virtual triage, and then that's the first step before then going to the kind of standard, because again, you're making sure that they're spending the money that they have on the tests in the correct way. Is there scope for that, do you think, within this enterprise?
Yep. So we're actually in process with a number of entities. Okay. To use that. So the tool is currently being evaluated and to be able to prioritize people to go for an official screening, including government entities outside of the Middle East and here locally too.
Nice. And then final question from me is this something that you'd make available to an individual?
Yep, we can make it available to an individual. We do have, I think we can have, if you like, we can have a link shared so people can go through the experience themselves and see what happens. So I can share that just for all the attendees on the call today. We can share that link with them so they can actually go through the process and see how it works. Pretty cool. So yeah.
Because I'm sure there are many people that have been, for example, we were in London at the beginning of the year, and we were both sick when we were back in London, but by the time we were back here, we were fine, and things have come out that they believe the corona was in COVID-19 was actually in London earlier than perhaps was originally announced. So the chances are there's plenty of people that have been through it. And obviously, this test is not to say that you're not testing for antibodies, but what I'm saying is there are plenty of people, I think, that would be curious enough to spend a few shillings, let's say, to find out if this test gives them a red flag or not. I think it'd be quite interesting.
Absolutely, and I think it's quite cost effective as well. It's definitely cheaper than going to go visit a doctor. It doesn't replace a doctor. It doesn't replace professional medical advice, but for guidance, to understand whether you may be a risk, I think it's great to give you an initial insight. Yeah,
and just to be absolutely clear, so there's no ambiguity here. This isn't a test that you'd endorse on the back of which someone would throw a party. We're all past the means test, so now let's have a party. Okay, fine. Just so absolutely clear, there's no liability there. Okay, cool. Look, guys, if there are any more questions or insights, please do put them in the chat box now. So we'll just obviously wrap up. Look, I really enjoyed today's session. I think it's been a super interesting topic. I mean, so thank you very much for joining us on the call today.
You're welcome, and thank you everyone for joining too.
Just in closing for myself, I mean, obviously there's a few different things you've discussed here. If someone wanted to get in touch with yourself about anything that we've discussed, whether they want to perhaps use any of these solutions or they have more questions, how can they contact you?
I'm going to put that on you, Richard. So if everyone can get in touch with Richard, that would be great, and then we can take it from there. But the tools are available. Everything that we've discussed today is not a concept. They're live. They're in the marketplace. They're being used, and yeah, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Amin. So just in closing, so look, from what I mentioned earlier on today, guys, if you'd like a copy of the white paper I mentioned at the beginning of the call, please just type white paper in the chat box, and I can make sure one of my team contacts you in the next couple of days to make sure you get a copy of that once it's ready. Also, if you'd like to arrange an informal chat about becoming part of our mastermind community, just write mastermind in the chat box, and I'll reach out to you myself in the next 48 hours to arrange a one-to-one. Next week, we'll still be hosting a webinar, even though obviously it's Eid holiday here in the UAE. But next week's webinar will be focused on Singapore. We'll actually be joined by Dennis Mark, who's the former VP and GM of Hewlett-Packard APJ, and we'll be discussing how to turn a crisis into an opportunity. So, hope you'll join us then, but if not, we'll see you the week after. Thanks very much, guys. Have a wonderful day. Thanks again, Amin.
Thanks so much. Stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.